For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors left almost no trace. We were nomads, hunter-gatherers, living with the rhythm of the planet. And then, all of a sudden, around 12,000 years ago, something completely new happened. We started building these massive, heavy monuments out of stone. And the big question has always been, why?
So let's start at what you might call ground zero, a place called Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. These incredible T-shaped pillars were carved and raised up 12,000 years ago. Now, to put that in perspective, that's over 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. And here's the real kicker. The people who built this, they weren't farmers, they didn't live in cities, they were still nomads.
And right there, that's the big mystery that's had archaeologists scratching their heads for decades. Why the sudden change? I mean, after an almost unimaginable stretch of time just living lightly on the land, what on earth possessed our ancestors to start quarrying and moving these multi-ton blocks of stone to build something that had never, ever existed before?
Well, for a long time, the simple answer was always farming. People settle down, they grow food, that leads to villages, then cities, and then finally, big monuments. But Göbekli Tepe completely flips that timeline upside down. The monuments came first. It looks like before we ever planted a single seed with the idea of staying put, we were already gathering together to build. So something else had to be the spark.
Okay, so the first clue might be something you and I have almost completely lost. Our world is just loud. It's a constant flood of noise and light. Their world, though, was profoundly quiet. In that silence, hearing wasn't just another sense, it was a survival tool. Every snap of a twig, every distant animal call, that was critical information. They lived in a world that was defined by what they could hear.
And we know they had a deep, deep relationship with sound long before they were building with stone. I mean, we found delicate little flutes carved from bone that are 40,000 years old. And when you look at ancient cave art, the best paintings, the really elaborate ones, they're often not near the entrance. They're deep inside, in the chambers that have the best echoes. And think about it, their entire culture, their history, it was all passed down through songs. Because music is the perfect way to make a story stick.
So all of this brings us to this really cool kind of new field of science that's helping us actually listen to the past. It's called archaeoacoustics, and it's all about shifting our focus. Instead of just asking what these places looked like, it asks a much more interesting question. What did they sound like, and why did that sound matter so much? So what all this evidence is pointing to is that the amazing sounds in these places, they weren't an accident. Not at all. It seems these ancient structures were deliberately engineered to be giant musical instruments, a kind of architecture as frozen music. Let's go back to Göbekli Tepe for a second. When those circular shrines were actually being used, they weren't the open-air ruins we see today. The evidence tells us they had smooth, plastered walls, carefully laid floors, and they were almost certainly roofed. Now, what do you get when you put all that together? You get a bunch of hard, reflective surfaces. You basically turn an outdoor space into an artificial cave, a chamber built to trap and amplify sound.
Okay, but what about a place like Stonehenge? That was always open to the sky, right? Well, to figure this out, a team of researchers did something that was, frankly, brilliant. They couldn't really test the real thing because it's in ruins, so instead, they built a perfect 1/12 scale model of how Stonehenge used to be, and they put it inside a totally soundproof room.
And the results they got were just astonishing. When they played sounds inside this little model, the echo faded over 0.6 seconds. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but for a structure out in an open field, it's unheard of. That just shouldn't happen. It had the same kind of acoustics as a modern lecture hall, which proves the stones were designed to trap the sound inside.
The researchers themselves put it perfectly in their paper. They said Stonehenge basically created a natural public address system. Any sound coming from the middle of the circle would get amplified and bounced back by the stones, making voices or music way more clear and powerful for anyone standing inside.
But it gets even crazier. The monument didn't just amplify all sounds, it was selective. When they looked at the sound on a spectrogram, they found that the stones specifically boosted frequencies between about 95 and 250 hertz. And what's so special about that range? Well, it's the primary range of an adult male voice. This thing wasn't just an amplifier, it was literally tuned to us.
Okay, so we've established these places were basically incredible, ancient concert halls. But that just leads to the next obvious question. What was the point? What did being inside one of these things, with these powerful, engineered sounds, actually do to people's brains?
Well, modern neuroscience gives us a huge piece of the puzzle. You know that feeling when you're listening to a song and you just get chills? That's your brain releasing dopamine. It's the same chemical that's tied to pleasure and reward. So by creating these really intense sonic environments, our ancestors were basically building giant dopamine machines, creating these profound, chemically altering experiences.
But there is an even deeper process at play here, something called brainwave entrainment. It's this natural tendency our brains have. When we're exposed to a strong, steady rhythm, like a drum beat or a chant, our own brainwaves start to sync up with it.
Probably the easiest way to picture this is to think about pushing a kid on a swing, right? If you just push randomly, it doesn't really work. But if you time your pushes to match the natural rhythm of the swing, it goes higher and higher. It's the exact same idea. A steady, rhythmic sound can push our brain into a very specific, more powerful state.
And this is where it all clicks together. Incredibly, acoustic tests at some of these ancient sites have found a key resonant frequency right around 10 Hz. Now, why does that number matter? Because 10 Hz falls smack in the middle of our brain's alpha waves. And alpha waves are what our brains produce when we're in a state of calm meditation, creativity, even a light trance. The building itself was tuned to guide the human brain into another state of consciousness. And all of a sudden, the motive for all this backbreaking work becomes crystal clear. These weren't just buildings or tombs in the way we think of them. They were a kind of technology. They were precisely engineered instruments designed to interact with the human mind and reliably guide people into altered states, to get in touch with something sacred.
So let's bring it all home. If the real goal was to create these powerful, consciousness-altering soundscapes, how did that one desire lead to a revolution that changed the entire course of human history?
Well, what this lets us do is propose a brand new timeline for how civilization started. And it doesn't start with a seed, it starts with a sound. First, you have the desire for these repeatable spiritual experiences. That leads you to build permanent sound instruments out of stone. To do that, you need a huge organized workforce. And those workers have to eat, right? Which creates the need for a stable food supply. And to solve that problem, agriculture is developed. And from there, the rest is history. The farm didn't create the temple created the farm.
And we can actually trace how this idea spread. DNA studies have confirmed that the people who built Stonehenge, their ancestors began migrating out of Anatolia, modern Turkey, around 8000 BC. And they didn't just bring seeds and animals with them. They brought this whole cultural information package. They brought farming, sure, but they also brought the tradition of building these sacred acoustic spaces out of giant stones.
So, when you really get down to it, the spark that created civilization wasn't about economics. It was something much more spiritual, more experiential. It was this deeply human need to create spaces that could transport the mind. And that quest, that was the engine that pushed our nomadic ancestors to finally settle down, to organize, and to change the world forever.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? For centuries, we've been looking at the past, trying to see what our ancestors were trying to tell us. But maybe we've been missing half the message all along. What other secrets are still out there? Not carved into a wall somewhere, but waiting in the echoes of the stones themselves, just waiting for us to finally listen?